The Khafretekh dynasty is a void-based Necron dynasty whose tomb worlds were lost in the last days of the Great Sleep. The Crown World, originally situated on the southern edge of the Segmentum Tempestus, and the rest of their territories were swallowed by the coming of High Fleet Leviathan. The remnants of their dynasty now roam the void in the form of a single, powerful battle fleet which houses the entirety of the dynasty's few remaining armies. These armies and the fleet itself can most commonly be seen striking at Tyranid High Fleet tendrils, especially in defense of still awakening tomb worlds. In the days of the ancient Necrontyr, the Khafretekh dynasty was founded by a philosopher queen named Amunet Khafra, who became the first pharaoh of the dynasty. She carved out a small but extremely wealthy realm in the galactic south, but like most other Necrontyr, died young from myriad diseases and cancers. Even so, Amunet's unusually optimistic philosophies, especially for a Necrontyr, instilled her people with a culture which valued wisdom, loyalty, and honor above all other virtues, especially its rulers. As Amunet had left her people with such an abundant, beautiful, and resource-rich domain, her heirs, her court, and even her subjects were able to continue to cultivate a culture of philosophy and honor for millennia. The Khafretekh dynasty garnered a reputation amongst the other dynasties as the pharaohs and pharaohs through the ages became known for their high-minded thinking and sense of nobility. Many of the other Necrontyr aristocracy scoffed at this, but a few grew to respect it. Upon the outbreak of the Secession Wars, the philosophical Khafretekh pharaohs technically remained neutral in the conflict between the supporters of the Triarch and the rebel dynasties. However, the several Khafretekh pharaohs who came and went during this conflict would usually choose to support one side or the other through the lending of wealth and equipment, choosing sides in this way based on personal philosophies without ever truly entering the conflict. Still, this did not mean the dynasty did not suffer during the Secession Wars. Almost none of the rulers of the Khafretekh were willing to sully themselves with the use of dishonorable tactics such as deathmark assassinations. Instead, they strictly adhered to the Triarch's codes of war through all acts, even those in opposition to the Triarch. Many of the highest-ranking Khafretekh nobility were murdered in this time by lower-born rivals with no such scruples. Those who survived this period began to adopt a more heavy-handed and pragmatic approach to rulership. The teachings of their founder would slowly be relegated to philosophical debate, then reduced to mere historical study, and finally treated as admirable but impossible utopian ideals. By the time the Star Gods came, the pharaoh of the Khafretekh simply believed that Amunet had been almost entirely wrong. The ruler of the dynasty at the time, an ambitious, charismatic young pharaoh known as Armeset, was already deeply ill at an early age, even for a Necrontyr. Armeset, like all pharaohs, had been a student of Amunet's teachings, but while Armeset embraced her strategic genius and political accomplishments, he diverged sharply from her teachings on the value of war and the honor to be found in it. Armeset believed that honor would be found in the crushing of enemies and the expansion of the Khafretekh's domain, such that their wisdom could spread. Moreover, he decided that Amunet's ways actually held her back from making the Khafretekh to be among the greatest Necrontyr dynasties of them all. Had she been more ambitious, perhaps she could have even rivaled the Sortek or the Triarch themselves. Armeset would correct this. He ordered the construction of an awe-inspiring armada to be made of the most colossal, advanced, and deadly Necrontyr warships. It would be the greatest military undertaking in the history of the dynasty, and with this fleet they would shine in the stars forever. And even more importantly, he filled his court with individuals who shared his aggressive worldview. Yet, for all this ambition, Armeset was dying. Raging at the unfairness of fate, he decided the only way he could hope to achieve greatness of any measure would be to accept this gift of eternal life that the Khatan offered, whatever the cost. And accept it he did, for himself, his court, and his people. Thereafter, under the direct control of the Silent King, the Khafretekh dynasty fought against the Old Ones and their allies alongside a Khatan known as Gorthor, the Terrible Dread. As his fleet grew, Armoset and his cryptics worked tirelessly, using the titanic clashes against the psychically charged Old One, Eldari, and Krork ships to develop countermeasures and test systems. And when the war was won, they destroyed Gorthor and captured several of his fragments in one great and terrifying display of absolute technological mastery. Then, the Silent King commanded the Great Sleep, and for 60 million years they knew no more. To their great detriment, the Khafretekh dynasty was very late to awaken. One of the first and few Khafretekh nobility to ever awaken again was the chief cryptic, a Necron named Sakides, the uncle of Armoset. Sakides awoke to a complete catastrophe. The year was 995 M41, and Sakides' vision flickered to life to bear witness to the rippers of Highfleet Leviathan tearing his body apart, even as the Canoptek scarabs struggled to defend him. The entire tomb complex was overrun. Taking direct control of the Canoptek constructs around him, he was able to sweep the rippers from his body and crawl to relative safety, his body below his torso ruined beyond even the advanced automatic repair protocols of the Necrons. Sakides downloaded an overview of the situation on the Tomb World. Never in his entire life had he known such an alien force as this. The vermin had already all but stripped the entire world of its lush beauty and abundant resources, and now the horrid creatures burrowed into the tombs beneath the surface. Time was short, and the horror had just begun. With no time to repair himself, no means of escape, and no hope of saving the planet, Sakides took a drastic step. He commanded a nearby Canoptek wraith to approach, then ordered the scarabs to remove its head and fuse what remained of his body in its place, permanently. Gaining the phasing abilities of the now defunct wraith, he used them to quickly travel through walls and between corridors to the awakening room of his nephew, Armoset, and that of the core members of his court. He had but one chance of saving them all, and himself. Quickly he moved from room to room, awakening the nobles and as many warrior forms as possible, all the while the tomb AI keeping him aware of the Tyranids' quickening progress as they tunneled toward the core of the complex. The awakening process was rushed and incomplete. Armoset and other nobles stumbled helplessly, barely able to think, let alone walk or fight. Sakides had them collected by raids and continued his trek to the center of the tomb complex. What few warriors, immortals, and other warforms could be awakened put up a feeble defense against the Tyranids with neither direction nor fully operational systems. But the delay they inflicted was enough. Sakides reached the center of the complex with his precious cargo. Therein lay the fleet that Armoset had ordered constructed so long ago. A Cairn-class tomb ship, the Shield of Aminet, along with its Scythe-class escort cruisers, the Caliburn, the Durandal, and the Grammar, as well as a host of other lesser, though still phenomenally powerful, void ships of many kinds. To activate even some of the ships, though, would be a process that took altogether too long. So, Sakides layered a new desperate gambit upon his desperate gambit. He issued a command for all the Tesseract vaults on the planet to be broken and all shards of Gorthor released. The ensuing battle upon the Tomb World was so apocalyptic as to make the prior fighting appear like a skirmish, but even the power of the Catan could not dissuade the terrible Leviathan. But it did purchase time. The activation sequences were complete, and Sakides initiated the mass recall of what few Necron warfighters remained upon the planet, teleporting them aboard the Shield of Aminet, then teleporting several ships directly from the tomb complex into orbit. Still, mighty as the remnants were, not even half of the ships in the Armada could be saved. Sakides spent only moments observing this new threat consume the former Crown World before activating the inertialess drives and catapulting the fleet far beyond the reach of this new horror. And so, the Khafretekh dynasty rejoined the greater galaxy. Armoset and other nobility would spend the next year under the close watch and care of Sakides as he oversaw their recovery. Their sudden awakening had severely damaged several of the nobles' minds, driving some into various forms of insanity. Though some did recover, others did not. Armistead himself would receive particular attention and thus did make a substantial recovery, but the Great Sleep sometimes takes a strange toll. At first, Armistead's recovery seemed to be progressing remarkably well. Sakidis, though, began to notice strange discrepancies in his nephew's personality. The chief Khafretekh began to discuss plans with his nephew to carve out a new empire in the stars, yet Armistead seemed uninterested, even disengaged in these conversations. Where once lay a proud mind filled with ambition and dreams of an empire that would span across the Milky Way, now lay a different sort of mind with different sorts of dreams. Shortly after Armistead resumed his throne, Sakidis would lead a minor battle against the so-called feudal world of the Imperium, which the Khafretekh had just begun to discover had well and truly usurped the Necrontyr Empire in this new age. It would provide the Khafretekh with desperately needed resources for their ancient fleet. It was a simple fight against an unprepared and pitiful foe. The opening skirmishes were a massacre for the human vermin, but to Sakidis' shock, Armistead arrived on the field and took command of his army, ordering them to fall back. Then he commanded that they re-engage, now following the doctrines laid out by the Codes of War. The Codes of War being only used when Necron fought Necron, many in the royal court were outraged that Armistead would use it against such an inferior species. Mankind was totally unworthy of the codes. But then, even worse, Armistead would offer the humans a chance to surrender. They refused and were subsequently crushed, but that Armistead had offered the chance at all was beyond scandalous. Armistead returned to the Shield of Amunet to face his court, who demanded explanation, but instead he would ignore their demands and make his first declaration as a free Necron Pharaon. The Khafretekh would undergo a new glorious and noble purpose. The last command of the Silent King lingered heavily in all Necrons' minds, to restore the Necron Empire. The only way for the Khafretekh to restore their dynasty would be to embrace their founders' teachings of old. They would once again become beacons of honor and wisdom, as Amunet was, and not only would they restore their dynasty, but they would restore the other dynasties. The Khafretekh's worlds had already been lost, and so they would instead become a shield against adversity for other Necrons. Their entire race was teetering on the brink, Armistead said, and they would be among the ones who made the sacrifices to see the rest of the Necron race restored to their rightful places. And the younger races? They would be shown the same respect in battle as Necron, and so it would be shown why it was that the Necrontyr had ruled and why they would do so again. The chamber was quiet. Frustrated, but beginning to understand that Armistead's change was brought on by an unusual interpretation of the Silent King's final command, Sakidis weighed his options. He could either denounce Armistead as insane and start a power struggle, or he could solidify his nephew's rulership in this new age, which already looked shaky. But Sakidis knew how fragile the Khafretekh's position was. He voiced his agreement with the Pharaons well, and so, one by one, the other nemesis and lords would fall in line with Armistead's declaration. Few were keen on this new plan, but they would fall in, for the time being. At last, prepared to face the present day, the Khafretekh looked out upon the once great domain of the Necrontyr to see a galaxy ablaze. Everywhere they had been usurped by a so-called Imperium, by the devolved orcs, by strange, immaterial entities from the warp, and worst of all, by the Tyranids, who ravaged it all. It was these Tyranids who drew the consummate ire of the Pharaon. The highest priority of the Khafretekh's armada immediately became, and has consistently remained, to protect still awakening tomb worlds from the Tyranids. Armistead resolved early on that he would do everything possible to prevent the tragedy of the Khafretekh from becoming the tragedy of other dynasties, and to many Pharaons this made them among the most honorable of all. Some Necron lords, ever loving to create honorific titles, began to call the Pharaon Armistead the Gallant. True to his new name, when void warfare was impossible, Armistead would frequently take the field himself to fight with his armies, and Armistead's overlord form was far stronger, faster, tougher and quick-minded than Armistead had ever been in life. and he began to relish these times of battle, reveling in his newfound strength. But never so much that he would make a mockery of his enemies, even the lowliest, most pitiful of enemies, with the exception of the High Fleets. The High Fleets he would plough through with brutal wrath. And with all these gifts, he began to sweep aside the enemies of the Khafretekh and the Necrons at large. And Sakides too would take to the field, whether alone or by Armiset's side. He would serve Armiset as an advisor and sometimes as a general, lending his experience and knowledge to help his nephew in all matters. He especially lent his expertise in matters of politics and courtly intrigue, which would prove to be the Pharaoh's new greatest weakness. Though he had been a skilled politician in life, Armiset's 60-million-year-old mind now could scarcely comprehend the scheming, machinations, and favor trading. So, in civil matters, it quickly became apparent to the other nobles that Sakides was the power behind the throne, though he would never try to seize it. To begin with, few of the court were as enthused about Armiset's quest as he was. It could sometimes be difficult to stir them to action. The Khafretekh nobility now could often be found using their new tireless forms to spend literal weeks or longer arguing or debating unceasingly and without rest, and when they weren't, they often chose to pursue petty rivalries and schemes. Several times in this unstable period, it fell to Sakides to make the proper threats and promises to secure his nephew's power. Sometimes he would even have to intervene to silence plots against Armiset. Few of Armiset's liege guards survived High Fleet Leviathan, and so, by Sakides' command, the Pharaoh could often be seen under the watchful protection of canoptek wraiths. Still, the political genius and guardship of Sakides left Armiset completely free to lead his dynasty as he would in regards to his grand vision. The Khafretekh became known as the force that would materialize from the void, strike like lightning in defense of a world, then vanish again into starlight. Embracing the codes of war to the point of fanaticism, Armiset would sometimes even fight with his armies alongside Imperium forces, helping to defend their planets against Tyranid invasion. Of course, such acts were not entirely charity. The price for such intervention usually came in the form of resources to replenish the fabrication halls of the Shield of Amunet. Many, many resources. Occasionally, these requests would be met with gratitude, but far more often than not, the Imperium's defenders would simply turn upon Armiset's armies immediately after the first invasion was repelled. In such cases, Armiset would meet dishonor with honor and crush the already tattered Imperial forces, still holding to the codes of war the entire time, and then simply taking his requested tithe once his enemies could not stop him from doing so. Upon the conclusion of a war in which the Khafretekh Armada successfully destroyed a small splinter fleet of High Fleet Kraken, Armiset and Sakides were approached by a mysterious traveler bearing gifts. Naming herself Thetaroon, once Pharaoh of the Nazaret dynasty, she bid greetings to the Pharaoh and his chief cryptic, offering her services to the Armada in the name of her liege, Zarek, the Silent King. She explained that Zarek had noticed their dedication in the crusade against the Tyranids and wished to earn their allegiance by sending her, and much more. Thetaroon delivered to the Armada several tesseract vaults. To their astoundment, they mostly contained shards of Gorthorn, the terrible Dread. And more, she delivered several shards of a strange Catan named Dioscuri, the Twin. Sakides expressed reservations and concerns in the face of such overwhelming generosity, wondering why the Silent King should show such favor and what he would expect in return. But Armiset, in the moment of political clarity, scolded his uncle for speaking dishonorably of the Triarch, dismissing him from the meeting. Then Armiset concluded the discussions and accepted Thetaroon's gifts and services, naming her an honorary nemesis of the Khafretekh dynasty, and beginning the Khafretekh's association with the Silent King. The Catan shards returned to the Khafretekh were a boon that increased the dynasty's power by orders of magnitude, allowing them to face battles that were far beyond them before. Thetaroon herself would prove to be a powerful, if incredibly brutal ally, with a taste for the sadistic. She and Armiset would frequently clash over ideals, and Thetaroon cared little for Armiset's self-important sense of honor. Vermin were vermin, and to be swept aside. Still, she was strong and loyal despite her constant criticism. Sakidis clashed with her just as frequently, though for different reasons. Each one would try to sway Armiset's actions, whether for the benefit of the dynasty, the Triarch, both, or even for no reason at all but to have swayed the Pharaon. He did not trust Thutarun or the Silent King. He felt certain the Triarch would spend the Khafretekh like currency if it had to. Despite the infighting that plagued his advisors and court, Armiset's sense of purpose was undimmed. If anything, it grew stronger each day, and his force of will to lead the Khafretekh became more absolute. Respect for the Pharaon grew, and even a sense of lost, if uneasy, unity, and the Khafretekh would soon need it. Rumors of a powerful Necron warfleet pillaging the fringe worlds of the Imperium had reached the Adeptus Administratum, the Imperial Navy, and worst of all, the Inquisition's Ordo Xenis. The Khafretekh would fight several campaigns against the Imperium near the end of the 41st millennium, most of them defensive. It was a simple thing to avoid the Imperial Navy with powerful cloaking and phase-shifting technologies, but soon the Khafretekh would find themselves engaging the Death Watch with increasing frequency, as they were the most successful in finding the Khafretekh with any regularity. A Death Watch kill team once even managed to infiltrate the inner chambers of the Shield of Amunet before being detected and just barely repelled by Thutarun and her attaché of Triarch Praetorians. As the 41st millennium drew to a close, and just as the 42nd millennium would begin, another missive from Zarek, the Silent King, came. Zarek's message ordered the Khafretekh to immediately divert to the Cadian sector. Something was happening. The warp rumbled and roiled. The Khafretekh were tasked with evacuating a dormant crown world that was in the path of the now rapidly expanding Eye of Terror. Nothing in their long eons could have prepared the Khafretekh for what lay in wait once they arrived. The dynasty had been content to ignore the machinations of chaos. The Necrontyr had long possessed technology that was anathema to the denizens of the warp, and whatever they did, they could be dealt with after the greater Tyranid menace had been destroyed. As Armiset, Sakidis, and Thutarun looked at the scene before them, they realized just how wrong that thought had been. The warp roiled and cracked as demons poured out of the expanding Eye of Terror onto the world below, but they were not the only ones. The tomb world of Taria 7 below hosted a war already, as a chapter of Adeptus Astartes fought against the demonic tide and heretic Astartes alike, to evacuate billions of humans who built their cities on the ruins of another once proud dynasty, now barely beginning to stir. And above, the battle barges of the Astartes were already locked in a deadly void combat with their chaos-tainted kin, who had their own titanic fleet raining fire down upon the world below. Rapidly analyzing billions of potential outcomes for the battle ahead, Armiset decided a risk was necessary if the tomb world was to be rescued. He decloaked the entire armada and began a targeted bombardment of the Chaos Fleet while simultaneously deploying hundreds of night sights into the world below, all the while ignoring the Imperial barges. The initial volley of lightning arcs and particle whips would instantly incinerate one of the larger Chaos ships. Armiset was all too aware that such ambush tactics were against the code of combat, but this was an utterly desperate circumstance, and the rest of the battle would be far more grueling than the opening volley. As the night sights arrived in the atmosphere, Armiset ordered Sakidis and Thutarun to command the ground forces and engage the demons, and Armiset would lead the void battle personally. The armies of mankind were astounded to see thousands upon thousands of Necrons teleporting into battle and intervening against their enemies, but so oppressive was their demonic incursion that each side recognized without words exchanged that they had to stand together or fail. Even Thutarun did not dare deviate to attack the Imperial forces today, and Sakidis would descend into the tombs to hasten the awakening of the Necron court, as he once did for his own dynasty. Meanwhile in orbit, Titans clashed. The Khafretekh Armada had always been able to face out of a battle that went against them, but today that would not be possible. They had to stay and fight until Sakidis completed his work, and time was against them. even the combined might of an Adeptus Astartes and a Necron warfleet could not hold forever against the seemingly unlimited number of hellish nightmares and demon-infested ships that now spilled from the encroaching Eye of Terror. Lances and lightning arcs silently lit up the void above Tarius 7. The Khafretekh's phasing and teleportation technology served them well, preserving their cruisers well beyond the limits of ordinary ships fielded by younger races. Armised's gamble was paying off, and the Imperial fleet was ignoring the Khafretekh. But against such overwhelming firepower, even Necrons cannot stand forever. Several Khopesh and Cartouche-class cruisers were destroyed, along with hundreds of doom sights and void bombers. The Durandal was crippled by an unfortunately accurate broadside from a fetid Retaliator-class cruiser bearing the mark of Nurgle. Worse, the Grammar was detonated from within by boarding action. Finally, Armiset committed the Shield of Amunet into the heart of the battle. The colossal warship initially shot back the Chaos Fleet, but then immediately came under heavy fire, and the Imperial fleet was beginning to withdraw, their own evacuation complete, or at least as complete as they felt they could afford. Time was running out. The Shield of Amunet began to spar with a pair of Desolator battleships, their heavy, warp-guided weaponry punching through the tomb ship's quantum shields and tracking even through its attempts to phase in and out. The first Desolator would fall to the Shield of Amunet's energy drain generators, all of its power siphoned from its systems, leaving it a helpless mass of metal floating in space. But Armiset knew his ship lacked the strength to face the remaining battleship. Even if they retreated now, it would take years to fully repair the tomb ship. He had but one option, and it was a bad option. Armiset ordered the Caliban to come alongside the Chaos battleship and shield the Khafretekh flagship from its fury. Volley after volley, broadside after broadside, the Caliban absorbed as it diverted all its energy to defensive measures. Then, at last, as the Caliban could give no more, Sakides completed his work, phasing hundreds of thousands of Necrons from the surface back to the Shield of Amunet, both Khafretekh and those from the now saved Dynasty. Armiset ordered an immediate withdrawal, what was left of his armada vanishing even as the Eye of Terror consumed Tarius 7. The Caliban imploded, and the Great Rift tore the galaxy in half. Reeling from their losses, the Khafretekh would disappear for decades. The Dynasty's cryptics would need that time in order to repair the surviving vessels. The Dynasty they had rescued from Tarius 7 would also disappear into the stars to make their own way, after leaving a tithe of warriors and other warforms in the care of the Khafretekh in payment for what they had done. Sakides would spend all of his time working to restore the fleet, and so would rarely be seen with the Pharaon in these years. A consequence of this was that Armiset became closer to the Triarch, fully aligning himself with the will of the Silent King, who Armiset decided must still be the rightful ruler of the Necrontyr, no matter how much time had passed. During this time, and until the reconstruction was completed, Fitarun would come and go as the Silent King demanded. Sometimes she would disappear for years, but each time she returned to the Hidden Armada, she would bring new gifts for the Khafretekh, ranging from artifacts to weapons, to war machines, to small ships. Once she even returned from her travels to deliver an entire destroyer cult and its lord to serve the Khafretekh. Understandably, this did nothing to ease Sakides' concerns about her or the Silent King. But, at last, the Chief Cryptic's work would be done. The restoration of the Khafretekh Armada was complete, diminished, but still deadly. Currently, the Khafretekh sojourn amongst the worlds, awakening tombs and crushing the Tyranid menace wherever possible, as they once did. But also, no, fighting the waxing power of chaos, seeking the rare materials and the even rarer allies with which to do so.